September 52, BCE, Alesia, Gaul. 80,000 warriors trapped on a hilltop. 40,000 Roman soldiers surrounding them in a ring of wood, iron, and death. And then, impossibly, 250,000 Gallic reinforcements arrived to crush the Romans from behind. Caesar should have been annihilated, his army caught between two massive forces, facing extinction. Instead, he did something no general had ever attempted at this scale. He built a second wall, facing outward. For 6 weeks, 10 legions held a double ring of fortifications stretching nearly 40 kilometers around a single hill. 2 armies attacked simultaneously from opposite sides, and in the space between the walls, thousands of civilians starved in no man's land because Caesar refused to let them through. This wasn't just a siege. It was a machine designed to trap an entire rebellion and watch it die. By the end, Gaul's greatest hero would kneel in chains, a nation's resistance would collapse, and Rome would gain 300 years of dominion over Western Europe. One battle, one trap, the end of Celtic independence. This is the story of how Julius Caesar turned engineering into mass execution, and how the siege of Alesia became the most coldly calculated death trap in ancient warfare. The chase. To understand Alesia, you need to understand the summer that preceded it. All of Gaul was burning. After 6 years of Roman conquest, the tribes had finally united under one man, Vercingetorix, a young Arvernian noble with a radical strategy. Don't fight Rome in open battle. Burn your own crops. Starve the legions. Make Gaul a wasteland they cannot occupy. It was working. At Gergovia, Caesar had suffered his first major defeat. 700 legionaries dead, 46 centurions killed. The invincible general had retreated. Gallic confidence soared. Then Vercingetorix made his mistake. His cavalry attacked a Roman column and lost. Badly. Spooked by the defeat, he pulled his entire army back to the hilltop fortress of Alesia, a naturally defended oppidum of the Mandubi tribe. Steep slopes on all sides, 2 rivers at its base, room for his 80,000 warriors to rest and resupply while reinforcements gathered from across Gaul. It seemed like a sound tactical decision. High ground, fresh water, time to recover. Caesar saw something else entirely. He saw a trap waiting to be sprung. Stay with me. The impossible decision. Any conventional general would have done the obvious thing: storm the hill, overwhelm the defenders with Roman discipline, end the rebellion with one decisive assault. Caesar ran the numbers. Alesia sat on a plateau 150 meters above the plain. The slopes were steep, the walls strong, the defenders numerous. A direct assault would cost thousands of Roman lives, and might still fail. Vercingetorix wanted him to attack. The Gauls would have every advantage fighting downhill behind fortifications. So Caesar made the decision that defined his genius. He wouldn't attack at all. He would build a wall around the entire hill, 18 kilometers of fortifications, and he would wait for 80,000 people to starve. But here's where the calculation turned terrifying. Caesar knew Gallic reinforcements were coming. Messengers had already escaped Alesia, riding to every tribe in Gaul. Within weeks, a massive relief army would arrive to break the siege. Most generals would have abandoned the plan. You cannot besiege a fortress while being attacked from behind by a larger army. Caesar's solution? Build a second wall. Think about that. The double ring. The inner wall, the circumvallation, faced Alesia. 18 kilometers of fortifications designed to keep 80,000 Gauls trapped on their hill. Ditches, ramparts, towers every 80 feet. A ring of death pointing inward. The outer wall, the contravallation, faced the world. 21 kilometers of identical fortifications designed to hold off the relief army. Same ditches, same ramparts, same towers. A ring of death, pointing outward. 40 kilometers of walls, 40,000 soldiers, and Caesar deliberately placing his entire army between two hostile forces. Here's where it gets strange. This wasn't desperation, this was calculation. Caesar understood something his enemies didn't. Defenders behind prepared fortifications hold an overwhelming advantage. The Gauls inside Alesia couldn't break out. The relief army couldn't break in. As long as the walls held, time was on Rome's side. Every day the siege continued, Alesia starved a little more. Every failed assault on the walls would cost the relief army thousands. Caesar wasn't trapping himself. He was trapping everyone else. The only question: could 40,000 Romans build 40 kilometers of fortifications before the relief army arrived? The legions started digging. Engineering the kill zone, what Caesar built wasn't just a wall, it was a machine designed to make attacking suicidal. First came the ditches. 2 parallel trenches, each 15 feet wide. The inner ditch was flooded with river water, creating a moat. Any attacker would have to wade through chest-deep water while defenders hurled javelins from above. Behind the ditches rose the rampart, a 12-foot wall of earth and timber topped with a fighting platform and sharpened stakes. Towers studded the wall every 80 feet, each equipped with scorpions and archers who could pour fire down into the killing ground. But the true horror lay in front of the ditches. Caesar's engineers created what we might call an ancient minefield. First, the Cippi. 5 rows of sharpened logs buried in trenches, their fire-hardened points concealed by brush. 1 wrong step and a stake punches through your foot. Then, the Lilia, the lilies. 8 rows of circular pits, each 3 feet deep, with sharpened stakes at the bottom, covered with twigs and leaves. Step on one and you drop onto an iron-tipped spike. Finally, the stimuli. Iron barbs hidden in the grass, invisible everywhere. Watch what happens next. An attacker charges the Roman line. He hits the stimuli first, barbs through his feet. He stumbles into the Lilia, a stake through his leg. He drags himself forward into the Cippi, more stakes. If he somehow survives all 3, he reaches the flooded ditch, then the rampart, then the towers raining death from above. And this system ran for 40 kilometers, in both directions. The race. 40,000 soldiers worked in shifts around the clock. While one group dug, another stood guard. While one group cut timber, another hauled earth. The fortifications rose from the ground like something inevitable. Scouts brought daily reports. The tribes were answering Vercingetorix's call. Warriors gathering from every corner of Gaul, the Aedui, the Arverni, the Senones, a force unlike anything Caesar had faced. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched the walls rise and made his own calculation. He had cavalry, still mobile, still dangerous. Before the Roman ring closed completely, he ordered his horsemen out. Thousands of Gallic cavalry burst through the incomplete fortifications and scattered into the countryside. Their mission: reach the gathering tribes, accelerate the relief force, return with an army that would crush Rome between hammer and anvil. The cavalry escaped, the ring closed, and 80,000 warriors, plus the entire civilian population of Alesia, found themselves sealed inside. Now the starvation began. The counting. Vercingetorix had planned for a siege. He'd stockpiled grain. He'd rationed from the beginning. His warriors could hold for weeks, long enough for the relief army to arrive. But he hadn't planned for 80,000 people. The hilltop fortress was designed to shelter the Mandubii tribe. Maybe 10,000 civilians. Now it held 8 times that number. Warriors, horses, camp followers, and every person who'd fled the countryside ahead of the Roman advance. The math was brutal. Even with strict rationing, the grain wouldn't last. Vercingetorix cut rations once. Then again. Horses were slaughtered for meat. Then the dogs. Warriors who'd expected weeks of supplies watched their food disappear in days. From the Roman walls, Caesar's soldiers could see the smoke of Gallic cook fires growing thinner. Fewer horses visible on the plateau. The siege was working exactly as designed. But Vercingetorix held one advantage: hope. His cavalry had escaped. The tribes were gathering. Relief was coming. Every night the defenders scanned the horizon for signal fires. Stay with me, because what happens next is the darkest moment of the siege. The expelled. The council met in desperation. Food for warriors or food for civilians, they couldn't sustain both. Someone suggested surrender. Others demanded a final sortie, death before dishonor. One chieftain named Critognatus proposed something else entirely, something so extreme that Caesar recorded it with a kind of horrified fascination. Let the defenders survive by eating those, too weak to fight. The elderly, the sick, the dying. They rejected cannibalism, but they accepted the logic beneath it. The weak had to go. The gates of Alesia opened, and the Mandubi, the tribe whose city this was, were pushed out. Women, children, the elderly. Thousands of civilians expelled from their own home to save food for the warriors who'd brought this catastrophe upon them. They walked down the hill toward the Roman lines. In every previous siege, this was the understood protocol. The Romans would accept them as slaves, or simply let them pass through. Civilians were currency, not combatants. The civilians reached the Roman fortifications. They begged for entry. They begged to be enslaved. Anything but the space between the walls. Caesar said no. Think about that. He couldn't feed them. His own supplies were calculated to the last grain. He couldn't let them through. They'd warn the relief army of Roman positions, or simply add to the forces he'd eventually face. So he left them exactly where they were. Thousands of people, trapped in no man's land, caught between walls that neither side would open. The dying ground. For days, the Mandubi starved in the shadow of both armies. The Gauls on the hill could see them, their own families, their own tribespeople, dying in the grass below. The Romans on the walls could see them too, close enough to hear the weeping, the prayers, the silence that followed. This was psychological warfare of the cruelest kind. Every death in no man's land was a message to Alesia. This is your future. Every day the civilians survived was a drain on Gallic morale, a visible countdown to what awaited everyone on that hill. Caesar recorded the expulsion without emotion. It was a military problem. He solved it by doing nothing. The machine worked as designed. We don't know exactly how many died between the walls. Caesar doesn't say. The silence in the historical record is its own kind of horror. Here's where it gets worse. The fires on the horizon, weeks into the siege. Alesia's defenders reduced to eating scraps. The civilians in no man's land reduced to nothing at all. Roman soldiers standing double watches, waiting for an attack that hadn't come. Then, one evening, the scouts reported movement. Fires. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Spreading across the hills west of Alesia like stars falling to earth. The relief army had arrived. Put yourself on that hilltop for a moment. You're a Gallic warrior. You've been starving for weeks. You've watched your own people die between the walls. You'd started to wonder if the tribes had abandoned you. And now, lights beyond counting. The largest army Gaul has ever assembled. Coming to break the walls, slaughter the Romans, and drag your people back from the edge of death. Vercingetorix's men began to cheer. After everything, after the starvation and the horror, hope had returned. Caesar's soldiers heard the cheering from Alesia. They saw the fires, too. They understood exactly what was coming. 40,000 Romans, caught between 80,000 starving warriors who had nothing left to lose, and 250,000 fresh troops who'd marched across Gaul for this single battle. The trap Caesar had built for others had become his own. The relief. Modern historians argue about the numbers. Caesar claimed 250,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry, almost certainly exaggerated, but even conservative estimates put the relief force at 100,000 warriors, more than double Caesar's strength. The Gauls had assembled their greatest coalition since the invasion began. 8 major tribes, thousands of warriors from each, an army that stretched across the countryside, too large to count, too numerous to feed for long. That last detail mattered. The relief army had its own problem. It couldn't sustain a prolonged siege. Feeding 100,000 men in hostile territory burns through supplies fast. They needed a quick victory, which meant they would attack. Soon, with everything they had, Caesar inspected his walls. The outer fortifications were complete. The obstacle belts were in place. Every tower was manned, every scorpion loaded, every legionary in position. 40 kilometers of defenses, 2 directions of threat, 0 room for error. The assault came the next morning. 2-front hell. The relief army hit the outer wall at dawn. Thousands of Gauls charging across the obstacle fields, shields raised against the artillery fire, warriors falling into the Lilia pits, screaming as stakes punched through legs and torsos. At the same moment, Vercingetorix launched his own assault from Alesia. Starving warriors pouring down the slopes towards the inner wall, desperate to break the ring before their strength failed completely. Romans fighting in both directions simultaneously, javelins flying inward and outward, scorpions pivoting between targets, reserves sprinting along the fortification corridors to reinforce wherever the line bent. The obstacle belts did their work. Wave after wave of Gauls broke against the defenses. Men who survived the stimuli and the Lilia still had to cross the flooded ditch under arrow fire. Those who reached the rampart faced legionaries fighting from behind 12 feet of earth and timber. Watch what happens next. The first day ended with the walls intact. The second day, the same. The Gauls pulled back, regrouped, counted their dead. But they weren't finished. They'd been watching, probing, looking for weakness. And they'd found it. The weak point, the northern sector, where the terrain made the fortifications incomplete. A hill too steep to fully fortify. Walls that didn't quite connect. A gap in the killing machine. The Gallic commanders saw it. They reorganized. 60,000 warriors, the best they had, massed for a concentrated assault on that single point. This time there would be no probing attacks, no testing the defenses. Everything at once. Overwhelm the weak sector, pour through the gap, roll up the Roman line. From behind. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix saw the massing troops. He understood the plan. When the relief army hit the northern wall, he would launch his own assault against the inner fortifications. Maximum pressure. Both directions. The same moment. The Romans would have to break somewhere. At midday, the horns sounded across the Gallic lines. 60,000 warriors charged the northern sector, and the siege of Alesia reached its breaking point. The breaking point. The northern wall disappeared under a wave of bodies. 60,000 Gauls hit the weak sector simultaneously. Not a probe, not a test. A human tide designed to wash the defenses away through sheer mass. Warriors scrambled over their own dead to reach the rampart. Shields locked overhead against the rain of javelins. Siege ladders went up faster than Romans could throw them down. From Alesia, Vercingetorix launched everything he had left. Starving men who knew this was their final chance. They crossed the killing ground, through pure desperation, climbing over the bodies caught in the Lilia pits, pushing through the sippy stakes on the corpses of the men ahead of them. Romans died at their posts. Centuries that had held for weeks began to buckle. The line that had seemed unbreakable started to bend. Caesar received the reports from every sector. South wall holding, east wall holding, inner wall under pressure but intact. Northern Wall. The Northern Wall was failing. Here's where it gets strange. In his own account, Caesar describes what happened next with unusual detail, almost like he wanted history to remember this specific moment. He grabbed his crimson cloak, the one that made him visible across any battlefield, and rode for the northern sector. Caesar's gamble. The general arrived at a line that was already breaking. Gauls on the rampart, hand-to-hand fighting in the corridors, Roman reserves committed, spent, dying. Caesar had one card left. Cavalry. He'd kept his Germanic horsemen in reserve throughout the siege. Fresh. Rested. Waiting for exactly this moment. Now he sent them out through a hidden gate in the fortifications, not to reinforce the wall, but to circle behind the Gallic assault force. Stay with me. The Gauls didn't see them coming. Every warrior was focused forward, pushing toward the breach, victory meters away. They'd committed everything to breaking the wall. Then the Germanic cavalry hit them from behind. The psychology of battle is fragile. One moment you're winning, pressing forward, tasting victory. The next moment there are horsemen in your rear, your flanks are collapsing, and the men beside you are running. Panic spread faster than the cavalry could ride. The rear ranks broke first, then the middle, then the warriors on the rampart itself. 60,000 men who'd been moments from victory dissolved into a fleeing mob. The Romans cut them down by the thousands. The collapse. From Alesia's walls, Vercingetorix watched the relief army shatter. The largest force Gaul had ever assembled, broken in an hour. Warriors streaming across the countryside in every direction. No rally point, no second attempt, just flight. His own assault had already failed. The inner wall had held. His starving men had given everything, and it hadn't been enough. Now there would be no rescue, no second relief force, no hope at all. Beat. The Gallic chieftain called back his warriors. The gates of Alesia closed one final time. Inside the fortress, 80,000 people understood what the silence meant. The fires on the horizon were gone. The cheering had stopped. There was nothing left but the Roman walls and the slow arithmetic of starvation. Caesar didn't assault. He didn't need to. The machine worked as designed. He simply waited for the dying to finish. The surrender. The next day, Vercingetorix gathered his commanders. Some wanted a final sortie, death in battle rather than chains. Others saw no point. Their men could barely lift weapons. The debate was brief. There was nothing left to debate. Vercingetorix made his decision alone. He put on his finest armor, his most ornate weapons, the regalia of a king leading free men. Then he rode down from Alesia, through the gates, across the killing ground where thousands had died. He reached the Roman fortifications. Caesar sat waiting in his general's chair, surrounded by his legates, his standards, his victory. The accounts differ on what happened next. Caesar's version has Vercingetorix circling silently, then throwing his weapons at Caesar's feet and sitting in submission. Other sources describe words exchanged, defiance, dignity, a final declaration of Gallic courage. What isn't disputed? The rebellion ended in that moment. Vercingetorix knelt. Gaul fell. 300 years of Roman rule began. Think about that. The cost. Caesar took no chances with his prize. Vercingetorix was chained, transported to Rome, and thrown into the Tullianum, the ancient prison beneath the Forum. He would remain there for 6 years, kept alive for a single purpose. In 46 BCE, Caesar celebrated his Gallic triumph, the greatest victory parade Rome had ever seen. And at its center, dragged through the streets in chains, was the man who had united Gaul against Rome. After the parade, Vercingetorix was taken back to his cell and strangled. The defenders of Alesia fared little better. The survivors, those who hadn't starved, were distributed as slaves among Caesar's legions, one prisoner for every soldier. The spoils of victory, paid in human beings. The Mandubi, the tribe whose city had become a tomb, ceased to exist as a people, their lands absorbed, their name forgotten. Collateral damage in someone else's war, the machine's purpose. Alesia worked because Caesar understood what sieges actually are, not battles, not contests of courage or skill. Sieges are mathematics, calories consumed versus calories available, days until starvation. The cold geometry of time. The double wall didn't need to be unbreakable. It needed to be expensive, so expensive to assault that every attack cost the Gauls more than they could afford. The obstacle belts, the flooded ditches, the towers every 80 feet. None of it was designed to stop an army forever. It was designed to make the army bleed faster than the defenders. The relief force had one chance: break through quickly before their own supplies ran out. They failed. After that, mathematics took over. The walls held. Alesia starved. The rebellion died exactly as Caesar calculated it would. 40 kilometers of fortifications, 40,000 soldiers, one trap that caught an entire nation. What remained? Gaul became Roman. For 300 years, the tribes that had nearly destroyed Caesar's army were absorbed into the empire. Latin replaced their languages. Roman roads crossed their lands. The Gallic aristocracy became Roman citizens, their children educated in Roman schools. Their gods merged with Roman. Pantheons. Vercingetorix became a footnote. Then, centuries later, a symbol. French nationalism resurrected him as a hero, the first defender of the homeland. A statue stands at Alise Sainte-Reine today, where archaeologists found the ditches, the ramparts, the Lilia pits. Caesar's account confirmed in iron and earth. The civilians who died in no man's land left no statues, no names, just silence in the historical record and bones beneath the soil. The final image. September 52nd BCE. 40 kilometers of walls, 2 armies, 1 hill, a machine designed to trap an entire rebellion and watch it die. In the end, Caesar didn't defeat Vercingetorix. He didn't outfight him, or outmaneuver him, or break him in glorious battle. He built a cage of wood and iron and mathematics, and he waited for the dying to finish. The last image from Alesia isn't the surrender. It isn't the triumph in Rome. It isn't even the battle. It's the space between the walls, the no-man's land where the Mandubi starved, within sight of both armies. The place where Caesar's calculation met its human cost. 40 kilometers of fortifications, 80,000 trapped, 250,000 who couldn't break through. And in the silence between the walls, the true face of empire.